Second, real quick, paradox of participation and power. Democracy was born in small places, the polis, the township, the principality. And it works very well when you have a couple hundred or a couple thousand people, same language, same religion, same background, same values. It's pretty easy to get them to share goods and pursue common interests. Moreover, most importantly, it allows people to participate. You go to the town hall, you go to the Acropolis, you go to the Pnyx where you met and debated. You did things together. You debated and made decisions. A room like this, democracy isn't hard. But when the city grew to 200, 300,000, when cities grew into small states, when states grew into large states, suddenly you had not thousands but millions, tens of millions. And suddenly participation, so crucial to democracy, engagement and community and civic trust, so crucial to democracy, got very hard. It's one thing to trust your neighbors or the people in your county, but how do you trust a couple 100 million people from 60 different backgrounds and many different religions? We love our multiculturalism, but it's a problem. It's much harder to trust and agree with people from lots of different ethnic and cultural and religious backgrounds. Much as we might admire that, finding agreement gets much, much tougher. But that's what we are constrained to do. So the problem of scale, the scaling up of our societies, has made democracy and participation and the kinds of shared values that we depend on very, very difficult. So even where we understand that the protection of the environment is a shared goal, it may be in a context where we despise the immigrants, don't like the Catholics, hate the Muslims, think the atheists don't know what they're talking about, and that makes shared action, even on things we do agree on, very difficult. Moreover, and this is particularly true of climate justice, and I heard it discussed very thoughtfully this morning, some of the small things that we can do locally have no real impact on where the power is. Because if participation is local, power is central. Participation and engagement happen in the neighborhood, but power is somewhere else. Here in Garrison, stuff goes on in the county, you can affect maybe even in Albany, but when it's controlled in Washington, that's a problem. Used to be that your bank in France was controlled by a local bank, then a regional bank, a national bank. Now, the Frankfurt Bank, the European Bank, is doing stuff, and you say, that's a long ways away. How can I be involved in the banking community when my bank is way off somewhere else? Now global cities, whether it's Beijing or Sao Paulo or Jakarta or Paris or Rome or Frankfurt, are where the action is, where the power is, and we sit around in Garrison or a little town in Provence trying to figure out, well, how can we pull the levers that are going to affect something? And even if we get people to engage, importantly, in these local neighborhoods, we find that it doesn't really affect what's going on, because power is somewhere else, very centralized, very distant, very remote. So we also need a solution to this paradox of participation and power. How to bring participation in a meaningful way closer to where the real centers of power are without watering it down, diluting it, dissolving the social trust that makes it work. It's a paradox. It's not bad will. It's a tough thing to make work. And some people have said actually autocracy and authoritarianism are much better to deal with climate change, because if you get one guy who gets it, who happens to be the king or the monarch or the despot, it's done. I've been working in Libya some. If Muammar Gaddafi gets it, Libya is going to be green. And if he doesn't, it won't. But you don't have to convince the Libyan people to do it and get them to understand it and create a community that way. So democracy is actually something of a problem when it comes to scale and makes our issues more difficult. There are notions around locality is one of them, a word that tries to say there's a way in which power is global, participation is local, how do we bring them together? But it's more of a word than a solution so far, because I'm not quite sure how it plays out democratically. But it's part of the challenge that we face politically. And that points to the third challenge that we're going to have to deal with, and that's the challenge that even were we to reconstruct and rehabilitate our democratic institutions, and let's say 80% of the American people spoke clearly, and the American Congress and the American president passed powerful legislation limiting carbon emissions and really making a difference, we know that global warming has no borders. It's global. At most, what do they think, 20%? Maybe we can control a little less than 20%, but 80% goes on without us. It's happening elsewhere. And it turns out, in fact, that almost all of the challenges we face in a democracy, whether it's terrorism, disease, labor migration, markets, health problems, weapons of mass destruction, and of course environmentalism, are interdependent and global, and yet we are responding to them with 18th century sovereign institutions. Sovereignty is a gigantic problem, yet democracy, I'm going to be finishing up, democracy is, I see you out of the corner of my eye, democracy is tethered to sovereignty right now in a very healthy way. You know, that's why it works so well. The nation state and sovereignty went hand in hand. But unless we figure out a way to globalize democracy or democratize globalization, we're going to be in a position where we can't solve the global problems of the marketplace that way. Last point, directly related, global inequality. People were talking in this room, and I do that too, and my wife does it, a little bit, I think, preciously about, oh, you know, I've got good bulbs and I don't drink bottled water and I'm doing very nice things and I can pat myself on the back. But there are people around the world who pay a tremendous price for environmental controls. People in developing countries look at us. We went through a century, paid no cost, developed, and now we're saying to them, we can't afford that you burn down your rainforest to make cities. We can't afford for you to develop the way we did. By God, if the Chinese drive cars the way we do, you know, that's the end of it. Passenger per mile. We can't allow that. But that points to a fundamental global inequality. Unless the developed world, that's us, figures out how to pay big time, not little time, big time, for environmental control and putting an end to global warming in the developing world, we will not have a solution. And the politics of that are even more complicated because that means raising taxes not just a little bit, but a whole lot, and then sending the money somewhere else, you know, and try to sell that if you're running for office. That's a very big problem. It's not completely insoluble, but we have to recognize that problem. That's why the Chinese and the Indians, the Brazilians, in effect, are saying, well, we'll do some things, we understand, we're at stake too, but we'll be damned if we're going to pay the full price when you paid nothing to get to where you are. So, you know, unless we find a way to share what we have, and that's very different than, you know, changing a few habits in your daily life, there's a fundamental problem. So these are the kinds of political issues that I think we confront. And while behavior modification and changing how we live and do things is absolutely vital, both as a political exemplar and in making our own contribution, in the end it will only be through political solutions that address climate change as a public, a common, a democratic issue, that we will find solutions, which I want to suggest that our real struggle here and among anyone who cares about these issues has to also be deeply political. It's a political battle, it's a political struggle, and ultimately will have to be won politically. Thank you.